I don't have the opportunity to speak a lot with either students of law or lawyers, Bernadette being one of the exceptions of that. So the We the People of Detroit Community Research Collective started actually in response to the crisis of water shutoffs in Detroit. In an attempt to augment kinds of emergency work, delivering water to people, taking care of people without water, protesting the shutoffs, stopping shutoff crews, there was a sense that documenting the social consequences of the water shutoffs would help build momentum to produce a more equitable water policy in the city. So the Community Research Collective began with a project to document the social consequences of the water shutoffs and mapping the water crisis, which I believe you have read, what was the report that came out of that. I think one of the, as a person with one foot in academia and one foot in community activism, for me, one of the most, or maybe even the most remarkable thing about the Community Research Collective is not that it is only community-based, but it is community-led. That is to say, when someone like me, an academic, is working in the space of the Community Research Collective, I'm not doing my research. I'm not entering that space because I want to sort of pursue my interests, and which is are very typical kinds of, I would say, formats for community-based research. The Community Research Collective, because it's community-led as well as community-based, produces work by and for the community. And so when I got on board in 2015, I had a set of interests and maybe research skills which had nothing to do with water, but water was the issue. And so I was mentored and I embarked upon the kind of research that was necessary to do work to support that project. So I think what I will do is maybe walk you a little bit through mapping the water crisis. Maybe I'll try to say a few words about what I think the primary relationships are between housing, which I gather is your focus in this workshop, and water, and then maybe we can talk. Bernadette, does that sound okay? Okay. So the Water and Sewage Department in Detroit has had a water shutoff policy for decades, but for decades this policy was rarely used, and this was a policy to shut off water to people who had not paid a certain amount of their water bills for a certain period of time. This policy began to be massively used when Detroit was placed under emergency financial management in 2013. So in 2014, as tens of thousands of families in Detroit were forced to live in houses without water, We the People became involved in supporting community members to support or augment, let's say, the protests against mass water shutoffs that were being held and to support equitable water policies. And so, as I mentioned earlier, some of us came together to document the social consequences of the water shutoff program. And here you see Monica, who I think will join us on the right, next to another founder of We the People. And this is us at our table working on mapping the water crisis. Which I think, yes, you have already looked at. So in a sense, what our research documents is the ways in which the water crisis in Detroit reveals fundamental but disavowed dimensions of democracy and capitalism in the built environment. It might be interesting or useful to think about this as aqua democracy. What form does democracy take when the focus is the distribution of water across communities that are differentiated by race and by class? And aqua democracy, in that sense, it looks very differently than democracy as such, at least in its kind of maybe idealized or ideal forms. So in Metro Detroit, the city's mostly Black water customers not only subsidized the regionalization of their water department to serve white majority suburbs that were inaccessible to them, and this I would posit is one of the fundamental ways in which water and housing come together. But Black Detroiters also subsidized water itself because their water departments sold water at wholesale rates to suburban water authorities rather than at the retail rates that they themselves were paying. At the same time, in Black majority Detroit, water customers can have their water shut off when their bills are unpaid for 45 days or longer, while in mostly white suburbs, water authorities offer far longer periods of time for bills to be unpaid before shutting off water if they allow water to be shut off at all, which some of those municipalities don't. And this is the second way I think you can think about water and housing coming together, which is to say, a house cannot house anybody if it is not connected to water. When you disconnect a house from water, the house cannot perform the function of housing. So as I mentioned, what you're looking at here is a timeline of water shutoffs, and you can see in the period of the timeline that's shaded green, how water shutoffs massively accelerated during emergency management. You'll also see, one of the reason why this graph goes up and down is because shutoffs stop in the winter time. So shutoffs massively accelerated in Detroit after the city was forced into emergency financial management. And you can think about emergency financial management also as a spatial manifestation of racism, because in Michigan, emergency management, which is a policy in which the governor of the state removes democratically elected municipal officials from governance and replaces them temporarily with an emergency manager. This is almost always imposed on Black majority cities in Michigan. It's almost never been imposed on white majority cities. And this yields a third way in which you can think about housing and water together, which is the separation of people from their houses because of unpaid water bills. In Wayne County, the county where Detroit is located, unpaid water bills after 3 years go on property tax bills. So they contribute to property tax foreclosures and evictions. And this is something that we tried to map at the end of mapping the water crisis. So what you see here is a map of water shutoffs in Detroit. And what you see here is a map that shows the relationship between water shutoffs and tax foreclosures, a relationship that is formed because of the relationship of unpaid water bills to property tax bills.
Andrew, let me stop you there. Personal
yes.
story about exactly what he just said is that we were, when I first got to Detroit to start doing this work, we came to a session hosted by United Community Housing Coalition, which I explained to you guys earlier. It's our inside-outside strategy. They're the ones actually keeping people in their homes. And they hosted a workshop for the poverty tax exemption. Obviously trying to sign people up, because we all know people were foreclosed upon for taxes they shouldn't have been paying in the first place because 40% of Detroiters live below the poverty line. And so UCHC, this is before we all got our act together, they were solo, desperately trying to sign people up for the poverty tax exemption. And I had just started my research, so I was going through everywhere, and I met this one woman, and I was like educating, like, everybody just about the poverty tax exemption. She goes, "Excuse me, professor, I have a poverty tax exemption already." I said, "Well,
Oh,
wonderful. Like, why are you here?" Like, I was like, "Why are you here?" She was like, "No, I have a poverty tax exemption, but it's my overdue water bills that they put on my tax bill, and that's what I can't pay, and that's why they're about to foreclose on my home."
yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a great
It was
story.
outrageous. And so what happened was the city of Detroit, there was a provision that allowed them to do this, that allowed the city to put unpaid water bills on the tax bill, meaning if you didn't pay it, you lose your home. Since about 3 years ago, they stopped this practice, but they have not given back the houses that were foreclosed upon for unpaid water bills. Again, these people had poverty tax exemptions, but they used this obscure provision to put the water bill on the tax bill. If
Yeah,
it's not on the tax bill, there's no foreclosure possibility. Go ahead,
yeah,
Andrew.
and yeah. Thank you, Bernadette. That's like a really vivid and compelling story. And I think one of the things that's very important to keep in mind there is that people in Detroit are not paying their water bills because they don't want to pay their water bills. It's because they can't pay their water bills because water is unaffordable. The EPA recommends that water bills be no more than between 2 and 3% of income. And many Detroiters have to pay water bills that go up to 10% of their income, and they can't afford it. I wanted to end by
Jump in for one more thing. They just heard from Professor Diana Hernandez in just the prior session. So we're not just dealing with unaffordable water bills, but the electricity, the gas, on so many of the utilities are unaffordable.
Yeah. What I wanted to end with was this map, which is obviously a map of the United States that documents essentially water insecurity, and it's showing that essentially a third of the people in the United States will soon be facing the kind of water crisis that the people in Detroit have been dealing with for decades. And so the connection between housing and water that is so kind of vivid in Detroit and is producing so much, not only water insecurity, but housing insecurity, is poised to become something that we're going to see in a much larger context.